Hi everyone, welcome to CSCI 100 Lecture 9. In this lecture, we're going to be learning a new data type, lists, and we're also going to cover a new computer science concept called mutability. Let's start with lists. Before we talk about lists, I want to address this idea of a data structure. Because as you'll see, a list is the first kind of data structure that you're going to learn in this class. All a data structure is it's some way to organize and store data. The main data structures we'll learn in this class are lists, which we'll talk about today, and dictionaries, which will come later in the semester. But as you go on to take more classes, the later CS classes at Howard, and even upper division classes, you're going to learn about more exotic types of data structures that let you work with different kinds of data more efficiently. A lot of computer science interviews focus very heavily on data structures and knowing which data structure to use for what kind of a problem. And so you'll find that later on, once you get to your sophomore or junior year internships, interviews for internships, that's what you'll find a lot of the questions will be about. And in the real world, you use data structures quite a bit to decide how to store data because we work with so much data. For example, at YouTube, how do we store all of our videos? How do we quickly access the videos? How do we store comments? Things like that. A good knowledge of data structures lets you come up with an answer to that question, and hopefully the best answer. But today let's focus on lists. So far we've learned these four core data types: strings, integers, floats, and booleans. We learned those way back in lecture 4. We also learned kind of another data type, the none type, which really just has one value, none, and it's only ever used to represent that there's no value, so I don't really count that one as a real data type. Today you're going to be introduced to your fifth real legitimate data type, which is the list. Why do we need these lists? Well, let's say you're making, you want to store users, just here I pick an arbitrary thing, the top 10 favorite soccer players. You could write out variables. Player 1 is Ronaldo, player 2 is Messi, player 3 is Drogba. I will say, even with this, just look at this, it'll be a little annoying. What if someone decides that Drogba is actually their favorite, their favorite soccer player now? Then you'd have to rearrange all these values one by one. You'd have to change player 1 to be Drogba, player 2 to be Ronaldo, and player 3 to be Messi. And as you want a bigger list, 3 looks okay, but imagine top 10. Every player has to have its own variable. And so the more data we have, the more complicated this gets, the more different variable names we have when we have to reference. And we can't even answer some interesting basic questions. We can't say how many players we have. We can't sort these players alphabetically. We need something that lets us do better. Cue the list. So what is a list? Formally stated, in Python, a list is an ordered collection of items of any type. So an ordered collection, meaning that the order matters and is recorded, of items of any type. And this is what it looks like. So we create a new list using brackets. So an open bracket followed by a comma separated list of values, which, by the way, we can have no values here. It could just be open bracket, close bracket. You could have one value with no commas. Or here, like in this example, you have multiple values. And finally, a close bracket at the end. And these values are indexed. So the first value in the array is actually index 0. And so here, this is Ronaldo. Index 1 is Messi. Index 2 is Drogba. Now, this is the type of this variable is a list. And this might look kind of familiar. Think back to your strings. with strings, how do we get a character back? Well, we indexed into the character by using these same braces after the variable name. Same thing for a list. So if we want to get a value out of a list, we take the variable name and we index into that variable name with these brackets and we give an index. Notice, same thing works as with strings where you can get the 0th index or the first index, or you can provide negative indices to count from the back, starting from -1. So Casillas here is index 3, but also you can refer to this as index -1. The reason this works is because a list is actually a type of sequence, just like a string was a type of sequence. So a string was a sequence of characters. Well, a list is a sequence of any kind of type. And it's not too difficult to work with them. Printing, same thing that you're used to. You can just print players. Or, here, if you want to slice and print some smaller group, the same slicing that we're used to from strings also works for lists. So this is a slice starting from 1, going until the end of the list, because we don't specify an index to stop at. And this prints Messi and Drogba. And again, just like strings, you can iterate over the items in this sequence or in this list. So we had this construct with for loops for x in sequence. And before, the only sequences we knew were ranges and strings. Now we're learning another kind of sequence, which is a list. And you can iterate just the same way for name, which is going to be my variable here, in players, which is the name of my list variable. And I can go ahead and print that name out in each iteration of the loop, which will print each player's name on a new line. So let's play around with that. If I open up Replit here, one example I could do here is I could have my TAs. We have Jonathan, Dindu, Braden, Deontay. So you can see here that to create my list, I write the values in my list separated by commas inside of these brackets. And I can print out first TA is, then TA is 0 to get this TA. If I run this code, we'll see that Jonathan gets printed. I could do the same thing, except I'll say the last TA is index 3, Deontay, but also I can say -1 to signify the last element in the list. And notice here, the fact that there is ordering is what we're talking about when we say that lists are where order matters in a list. So in our slides here, just going back to highlight this here, where I mentioned that a list is an ordered collection of items. So the fact that we can get the order matters. So index 0 is the first item in the list. That is what makes this ordered. Okay, now maybe I want to actually print all of the names, and I can say for name in TAs, I'll print name is a TA. Oops. Now it says, I need a space here for this to look a little better. Jonathan is a TA, Dindu is a TA, Braden is a TA, Deontay is a TA. One more thing I'll show you is maybe we want to actually print out the number of the TA. So for that, we can use a regular for loop with a range. So for I in range 4 here because there are 4 items. We'll go ahead and print TA number stir I print something like this. So we will loop over the values 0, 1, 2, 3, which is the sequence that range 4 generates. And we'll print out TA number and then the name of that TA by indexing into that index in the list. TA number 0 is Jonathan, number 1 is Dindu, number 2 is Braden, number 3 is Deontay. And you know what? I want this to start counting from 1. So I'll do I plus 1 here. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. And of course, notice I still have to, I can't, start my range from 1 and go up to 5. Because if I were to do that, this would try to index to get the index 4 of the list. And if you try to index into get a value that doesn't exist, our code will throw an error. It'll say list index out of range. So let me show that just separately here on its own line. Print TA's 3 will print Deontay. But if I try to do print TA's 4, this will throw an error. You can see it says list index out of range. And that's because index 4 would be the 5th element in the list, and there is no 5th element here. So you have to be very careful whenever you're indexing into lists. Just like when you're indexing into strings, you want to make sure that you don't try to access a value that doesn't exist. Otherwise, your code will throw an error.